General Grass, this is such just an amazing opportunity. You are a legend in the military world. You served as the former chief of the National Guard Bureau, where you oversaw over 450,000 guardsmen over all 50 states, the territories, the District of Columbia. You are one of five four-star generals who have ever served as gotten the rank of four-star for the National Guard in the history of the United States. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on. You advised the president, the Secretary of Defense, the National Security Council. You served on the Joint Chief of Staff. Like, it's just remarkable. But more important than all of that is that you just had a wonderful character, humility, a dedication to serve, and it's just such a privilege to be able to just chat with you and to get to know you a little bit more. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Colt. I appreciate it. And if I could come back to the four-star position, we have a very unique situation right now where the chairman of the Joint Chiefs is actually the sixth guardsman to serve, not as the chief of the guard, but as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. He's the first one to serve as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. So he's the sixth National Guard general officer.
General
Okay.
Nordhaus.
No, it's not General Nordhaus. It's General Kane. They
So
call
he
him
was a
Tim
National
Kane.
Guard, and now he's the chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff.
Yeah, he was brought out of retirement and nominated and then confirmed by the Senate. Uh,
I think a lot of us don't understand the how the military and the even what the Joint Chief of Staff really is. Can we just real quick, like, just give a understanding to everyone? What is the Joint Chief of like, what is the role of Joint Chief of Staff? Because I was thinking this the other day. I was like, if you were the chief of the National Guard Bureau, could you be the chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff, or is it a completely separate position where, like you saying, this guy came out of retirement and it's an additional, completely different role? Like, you can't serve as the chief. Like, I'm curious how that works.
right, right. And each position is authorized, through congressional process. All the service secretaries, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, uh, they're all members of the Joint Chiefs, and the Space Force is a member of the Joint Chiefs. And there's a chairman and a vice chairman. And the chairman is really the person who is bringing everyone together. We usually met Mondays and Fridays if we were all in town, or our vices, our number two
Yeah.
person, were the only other ones that could attend the meeting. And then we'd have the Coast Guard with us as well, the Commandant of the Coast Guard. Even though they're not on the Joint Chiefs, we always had them with us no matter what we did because it really makes that connection with Department of Homeland Security.
Or
Uh, the interesting thing is we are advisors. We do not command and control anything on the Joint Chiefs. The chairman tries to bring us all together and come with a consensus on our recommendations up to the Secretary of Defense and the President. So he's kind of our guide. We don't work for him, we work for the Secretary and the President. But I would tell you, I had just a wonderful relationship with General Marty Dempsey. What a wonderful man for me to come in as a new one, and work with him. And then when he finished and retired, General Joe Dunford, Marine, came in and had a great relationship with him in the last year. So if you think of it in his advisory role, we make our discussions, we bring in folks from around the world to talk about whatever the topic is, and then we close the doors and we hash it out there and we come to a consensus to make a recommendation to the Secretary of Defense and in some cases the President.
what an amazing role. Like, very few people will ever know what it's like to be in those closed doors. And like you say hash it out, and I'm like, oh my God, I would love to see what hash it out means when there's stuff that is so important and there's people who have just, rose the rank so high and like, to overcome some of those challenges. I think this leads me to like one of my first questions for you, General Grass. Um, what was your kind of decision process in making tough decisions, especially with time being so short? Like, you have to make quick decisions and they're very challenging. Like, what was your decision process? Like, how did you go about in making those?
Well, you hit on it right off the bat is the time. How much time do you have to make this decision? And who are the stakeholders who have an interest in this topic? And who's going to either benefit or lose in the process of making a decision. So understanding the time, understanding who the folks are, and having time to hear from them is critical. And really, if you think about the Joint Chiefs, that's what we do. It could be a long-term discussion. It could be a very quick decision that the secretary may have to make. And we've got to map that out, get the right people on all sides of the argument to come and see us to talk.
Yeah.
So we've got that information. And the other thing that I learned years ago from General Shinseki, who was the chief of staff of the Army when I was a one star, he came and spoke to a bunch of us, and he goes, when you get to this level, he says, it's very easy to sit back and try to continue to absorb information, and you will be flooded to a point where you won't make a decision because you're
Mm.
waiting for that next gold nugget to come in. He says, when you think you've got an 80% of all the information available, you need to make the decision. Make the decision because you've grown up. Your gut's going to tell you what's right and what's wrong, and make the decision. And I use that for so many times with them.
I think that's so fascinating to think. Like you really have to just go with your intuition at some point in the game. I mean, you just have everyone there at that level, so many team members, so many advisors, so many people, and at some point you just have to say like this is the right thing to do. That would be really difficult for someone like me, like someone that wants to know what the right or wrong thing. Like I'll do the hard thing. I just need to know what the right thing is to do. And if there's people who I respect on, all sides giving input, that would be really challenging.
It can be. It can be. That's why we close the door and have an executive session. And I tell you what, they're very cordial discussions. We lay it out. Everybody gets their opinion, laid on the table. But we've got to come to a decision for whatever the topic, we're dealing with. And it is hard because you sometimes you drive to yourself to that point, especially when you're more junior, of wanting just, get me one more bit of information, get me another piece of information. And you as a senior leader, the people will do it. They'll go get it. They'll jump backflips to get you that information, but you've got to call that time out and say, okay, I'm ready. I'm ready to make the decision. Let's move on.
Yeah. Do you remember any times where you heard bad recommendations? Like, is there something that you can think of that you're this was like I don't know. I don't know what that would be like at your level, but like, were there bad recommendations that you're like, I don't like when people would give that type of feedback?
I wouldn't say necessarily bad. I would say misinformed, I would say. The reason I say that
Sure.
is some people come in and they're so passionate about their topic, especially when they're more junior and they come into these roles and you're trying to mentor them and grow them, but they're very passionate about a topic and they get hung up on their personal feelings versus the facts. And you got to be able to delineate that. The further you go up through ranks, whether it's in a corporation or the military, you got to be able to delineate, okay, is this a fact or is this your personal opinion, a personal bias? And you got to teach young men and women, especially at the major lieutenant colonel level, that you're going to be serving, under you as a senior staff member. You got to tell them, hey, look, put your biases, leave them at the door. We want to work on facts. We have to, if it's an opinion, make sure you tell me it's your opinion and then describe why.
Was that hard for you to do, to give up? I mean, like,
Oh,
again, it's something that sounds hard for me to do is to give up like our strong convictions to certain things. Like, was that hard for you to do to like give up that and just like say, hey, Mr. Secretary, this is the facts.
it is. It is hard, especially as you grow up. Of course, I was an engineer officer and we're very detailed oriented. And I got to a point one time when I was a one star, we had a chief of staff and I was the deputy director for the Army National Guard. And the chief of staff knew that I was very detail oriented and he would try to help me from drilling down too much into things. And somebody laid a spreadsheet out in front of me, and they knew right away I was going to study that spreadsheet as an engineer officer. And he actually just pulled it away. He said, "Let's get to the facts. If you have an opinion, share it, but better back it up." So, we have those biases that we come with, just no matter where we come from. And you got to understand that as a leader. That's part of understanding who you are as a leader. And it could be a fault like mine. I could get wrapped up in counting the numbers or verifying the numbers. That's where
Yeah.
you got to put trust in that staff and you build that trust over time.
I think a lot of people don't realize that there's a lot of different branches within the branches of military. Like you were an engineer, right? Like I don't think a lot of people understand like infantry and there's these different areas. As the Is there a common, and maybe the answer could be just no to this, but is there a common denominator amongst the leaders, the generals? Like, are they like, is the majority of them engineers, or majority of like, do they all kind of like any area rise like to that level?
I would say in the past, you probably saw more infantry officers in the Army that would rise up because of the construct of the divisions. You know, everything's a division of 14,000 people, and all of the two stars that are moving up to 3 and 4 have had a division command. We have 10 active duty divisions. We have 8 divisions in the National Guard. So that was the key point there, I think, of why it doesn't have to be though. You know, General Odierno, God rest his soul, passed away way too young, and I worked with him. He was an artillery officer. Now he had served in divisions, and especially during the war on terrorism, because we had multifunctional divisions. We had, you know, coalition divisions from other countries. Um, and then if you look at on the Marine side, you're going to have, I served with Marine aviator. I served with the Marine infantrymen. The Marines probably had a little more flexibility. They're a smaller force, but they had a little more flexibility where they picked from. And Air Force, in the past, just about every chief of staff of the Air Force was a pilot. And it doesn't have to be, though.
Yeah.
For the Guard, being new to this, General McKinley, Air National Guard out of Florida, was the first guardsman to serve on the Joint Chiefs, and he was a fighter pilot. I came in as an engineer. Joe
I didn't know
Miguel,
Colonel McKinley was a pilot. That's cool.
yeah, and then Joe Willengale, who had been my vice when he became the chief, he had been a pilot. Dan Hokinson had been a helicopter pilot and an infantryman. So, and then General Nordhaus now, he was a pilot. So
Really? There's a lot of pilots in there. I didn't realize there was that many. That's
there were,
remarkable.
but most of them are going to be what we call combat arms, and I think it grows out of the whole idea that they're the ones that are really making decisions on the battlefield,
Sure.
and they get those opportunities throughout life from the time they're a lieutenant all the way on, and so they have a lot more opportunities, but it doesn't have to be that way.
No, for sure. It just, amazes me with, that you had at one point like about 450,000 soldiers that you had under your under your purview. Um, I mean, I was in real time here, I was thinking of that. 450,000. That's more than like almost every company in the United States. Like you have managed a group of people that very that I don't think the CEO of Disney has managed that many people. Like that's just incredibly. Then the amount of stress that would have come from that. What is your inner self talk look like? Like I always have this like I'm constantly trying to like fight dragons and put out fires, and I have this self talk in my head. What does your self talk look like? Like especially in those stressful times.
So, separate from the stressful times, but this does play out as you build a partnership. Is I had so many folks to work with that were incredible. The adjutants general, every state has an adjutant general, 2 star, and they actually command the forces in the state. And I am a channel of communication as a chief, between them and the chairman and the service, the Army and Air Force, because we have both Army and Air under the National Guard Bureau.
Right.
So those were my partners. And I constantly thought about how do I continue to build that partnership, even when some things maybe one state didn't like and another state did like. I have to keep that team together. And I need their advice, especially in times, budget crises are a big one. So the chief has a role over the force when they're federalized, as far as making sure they meet the standard when they get handed over to the Army and Air Force to go to war. Day to day, though, the adjutant generals are running that organization, whether it's fires, floods, tornadoes, you name it. They're running that organization. And then when we get the alert order from the National Guard Bureau, pass it on to the states. They've already done their homework. They know what the unit status is, what other training they're going to need to get ready to go to war. Of course, when the war started, we didn't have the resources in the early 2000s. So there was a lot of training tasks that had to be accomplished after they were mobilized by the Army or Air Force, more on the Army side than the Air. But as I reflect back, I think the real success of any chief is building that quick relationship quickly with the adjutant generals and the governors,
Hmm.
because they own them every day. You know, they are making sure that their medical's taken care of, you know, their supplies, their trucks, their tanks, their helicopters, their airplanes. I mean, I mentioned you have the National Guard has 8 divisions, uh, mostly infantry. Some are heavier ones with armor, but they also have all the support units with that, engineers, um, communications. Now we're into the cyber world.
Oh,
Huge. The Army National Guard has about 1,000 helicopters, and on the air side, the Air National Guard has 90 wings. Now, some of those wings, and a wing is similar to our division. It's a command and control element, and they'll have fighter wings, F-16s, F-22s, F-35s. They'll have tactical lift, which is a smaller tactical lift aircraft like a C-130. And then they'll have strategic lift, which is like the C-17s that are in the Guard. So you have all of those and then all the supporting organizations that come with that. So day to day, the tags are telling me, hey, if I got to be ready to go to war, here's what I need. Then my role is to find the resources and to work with Capitol Hill, work with the Senate Appropriations, House Appropriations, and the Senate and House Armed Services Committees to make sure that Congress knows, hey, if you're expecting this out of the Guard, here's what we need in resources, whether it's new equipment, whether it's pay and allowance money, operations and maintenance. So I'm that go-between, and it's called the channel of communications for a reason. Now, with that though, I did travel as much as I could, and in 4 years I did get to every state, territory in the District of Columbia, and I would usually do 2 tours, week-long tours overseas, to where the troops were mostly in combat areas, so that I could hear from them and also show that as their head of the National Guard Bureau, I'm coming out to talk with them. I want to hear from them. I want to hear from their active counterparts, especially if they're falling in under, say, an active Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine commander. I want to hear from them. So I would meet with them. And it was phenomenal. I still have folks that I bump in
yeah.
today at some of the conferences, and they'll say, hey, I met you in Afghanistan when you came through. It makes a difference if you're a leader, if you can get out there. And it takes time. I mean, the staff knew, if I went to, very seldom would I just go to one state. We'd team it up where there were 3 or 4 states I could visit at once. But hearing from those men and women in uniform and the civilian employees who support them was huge. And it made a difference for them too, as well as me.
I love that. I had the former chief of staff of the New Mexico National Guard send me a picture of you and him when you were in, you had come visited and he had a picture with you and he was, just so stoked on that. And it's just it really goes a long way, like that forever. General Frank Grass was an awesome, was leader to him. Like you took the time to meet with him and, understand New Mexico and like I think that's phenomenal. Backtracking one more, I love what you said about um, being a resource to everyone. I think that's such a wonderful leadership characteristic that no matter what, if you're in the military or not, if you're the CEO of Disney, like being a resource to your team, I think is a really powerful definition of leadership that I don't think we really hear, right? I think a lot of times we will think of a leader as in a leadership role, and we'll think of it as everyone works for me instead of the other way around where it's like, no, 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 I work for everyone. And I think you really have articulated that. And I think that's, I forget that at times myself, I forget that. And I think that's a really powerful reminder. Um, and to backtrack one more to the original question of the self inner talk. So what maybe tell me if I got this right. It sounds like you just had so many people at your just like to your advising you to support that there maybe wasn't as much time for you to have that self inner talk because you just had people around you nonstop. Where I think, some leaders don't necessarily have, an executive officer and a chief of staff and a deputy and, all of these people to go to that, sometimes I think a lot of us, like, I'll sit here at my desk by myself and just be like, oh, what am I doing wrong? And so like, do you feel like did I summarize that fairly? Like you just had so many people that it's harder to have that quiet, like inner thoughts?
Yeah, but I would tell you, you have to do exactly what you said. There are times that you have to close the door and you have to sit there and think through. And sometimes it was at night at home. You know, I'd be in my office, especially during some crisis that was going on, whether it was in the homeland or overseas. And we were getting ready, for a session of the Joint Chiefs. And it could be something very controversial, whether it's from the political side or the press or within the military. And you just got to close the door, spend time getting up to speed on the points and helping to kind of calm yourself down and make sure, again, going back to the biases, looking at all sides of it, because what you and I may think about a topic, we may be so close to it that we lose the big picture and how you get away from it for a while, and then you sit there and talk to yourself and think through it and do some more research. Uh, and I learned from General Dempsey about closing the door. He said that when he was a four-star in one of his first positions, he would close the door and he would get books out and he would read about a topic, and he
That's
was very good at that. And it's hard to get the time, but you have to do it. If you don't do it, you'll lose touch. And it is easy to get overcome by events. Luckily, I had a wonderful staff. I had an incredible vice in General Engel. Uh, so he was my number two. He took a lot of things off my plate that he could do that would allow me to go off and think at the bigger picture.
Yeah. No, that's wonderful. I always remember hearing Warren Buffett would read, I'm gonna butcher the numbers, but it was like it was very drastic though. It was like he would read like 8 hours a day when he first started his company, and to this day he still reads like 4 to 5 hours out of every single of his day is just reading. And I'm like, if Warren Buffett has done so well and done that, maybe we should all learn a little bit more from him. So I love that idea of just, closing the door, getting a book, and developing that mental mind. I think
Another
that's
thing that you can do, and I learned this actually from a good friend of mine. He actually served as up to a two-star level, incredible. And I was in a mentorship group one time, and he said this, and he uses it quite a bit. And he says, when you get to a certain level, moving up, especially as a general, you got to look at what only you can do
hmm.
and prioritize your tasks based on what only you can do. What decisions do you have to make that you can't delegate? If you can delegate, then get it in the right lane. But think through that ahead of time to try to determine what are the things in your mission set. Like for me as a chief, looking at what Congress said they want me to do, and then figuring it out, okay, I've got to prioritize my effort for those things first and go from there.
I think that's just I love hearing that of just what are the things that only you can do. I think so many of the times we as people will do things that we're just more comfortable with, that we're so used to doing. But as you're rising the ranks and growing in any role in any organization, it's like, what is it that only you can do? And if it's bringing people to the table, if it's whatever that may be, bringing more support for funding, whatever. I think that's a wise uh, a comment that I don't think a lot of us. I think we need to be reminded more of that.
Sure. Well, and going back to the discussion about my responsibilities working with the appropriations committees of the House and Senate and the authorization committees, I felt that was a role that I had to block the calendar for. When testimony came up, I had to be there. And I had to make office calls ahead of time to meet with the members and talk with them about the needs of the National Guard and understand who they were. I mean, when I would do my testimonies, I had a sheet that my legislative team put in front of me, and it would have the pictures of the committee members. And it would have on there what state they were from, what National Guard capabilities do they have, what are their primary constituents after, so that I could better understand them, even sitting right in front of me, and you'd have sometimes 20 of them, but I could look at it real quick and know, okay, I got to be respectful of his or her position because they're an elected official, but I still have to make my point too. So let's have this conversation.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful, General Grass. I want to go into, tapping more into kind of your just like personal habits and discipline. I'm really big in the there's a guy that came out in the last 10 years, James Clear. He wrote a book called Atomic Habits, and he's known to be the habit guy. And, just really kind of opening the eyes that like habits is what lead to success. Habits are what lead to virtue and building those habits. And so I would love to know, like, what does your morning routine look like? Like, do you like wake up and do you pray in the morning? Do you go for a run in the morning? Do you read in the morning? What does your morning routine look like?
So now or when I was in uniform?
That's a great, and that's really great question. I love that you asked that. So let's say, what was it at your peak of your military career, and then I would love to hear how it's changed to like what it is now.
Sure, sure. Well, first of all, of course, the military over the years, you kind of become ingrained to doing fitness in the morning.
Yes,
And if I
PT.
could do that in the morning, at least 3 days a week, if not every day sometimes, it was so important for my health, to keep both physically and mentally health. And just to go out, I lived at Fort McNair and to go out for a run along the Potomac River there, the inlet, it was just phenomenal. It just settles you down.
Was that weights, running? Was that hit workouts? A variety of all of them? Like, what did your workouts usually? Were they hour workouts? What did that look like?
Well, it was usually based on building my core to meet the criteria for the fitness test, and then the aerobics piece, which was the run,
Yeah,
to build that.
the
And
run is always the hardest.
yeah, yeah. So, but then come back, get cleaned up, get ready to go, and have breakfast and um,
What time
head.
would you wake up?
Depended on where I was. I mean, what was going on, but I'd say on the average around 6.
Okay, so 6 a.m. wake up and you'd go work out and then have
Yeah.
breakfast.
And and there's a key point here that I learned over the years, and I think it's very important for senior leaders. Again, whether you're in the military or running a corporation, doesn't make a difference. People are going to look at you as what is right because you may not think it, but they're going to look at you because you became a 4-star or you
Yeah.
became CEO. And so everyone that's, trying to figure out to be successful in their career, they're saying, well, he or she, looks right. So you have to watch that though, because I worked for folks sometimes, there's not very many, but there were a few over the years that would almost be there at 6, 7 o'clock in the morning. And they would run till 6, 7 o'clock at night. And sometimes you have to do that. But for the most part, you don't. And you have to figure that out. And me and my vice, General Ingell, sat down when I first came in and said, look, everybody's going to be watching us. And Joe was a 3-star at the time. And I said, we've got to set the stage. So you're not going to see me unless I'm traveling or I've got a meeting in the Pentagon. You're not going to see me here till at least 7:30, maybe 8 o'clock. And then at 5 o'clock, I'm going out the door. And you need to practice the same. Now, I may go home, I may have dinner, with my wife, and then I may sit down afterwards because I've got some email traffic to work on or something. But mainly, you got to set the stage because if you're there, say from 6 to 6, guess where every one of those young men and women are serving are? They're
Yeah.
there at least that time and probably longer. And they're away from their families. And unless somebody is shooting at you in combat, there aren't all that many times that you got to be there right then and there. You can work it out. And that's part of finding balance, which is something I think is really important. I learned that. Uh, I say I learned it. I can't say I got an A on it. I probably got a C, but I worked toward finding balance in life. And it's so important at senior levels, but all levels of the military. And it starts with spiritual. What is your spiritual goal? What is your spiritual position in life? We in the military, you know, uh, we don't care what religion you have. Our chaplains will work with you. And so I always tell folks, whatever your religious preference is, that's got to be a priority. So what did I do? I traveled a lot on weekends. I told the staff, now I happen to be Catholic, and I said, I'm going to go to mass either Saturday night or Sunday morning or Sunday evening. So you guys fit it in the schedule. And they did. They would figure it. And whether it was overseas or here in the United States, and sometimes it was very interesting to see some of the people I got to meet. And I had to tell the security guys, hey, I just want to walk in and be another parishioner sitting in the church. I don't need you guys all around me. You can come to church with me. But I went to
That's so
one church
funny.
one day, and they put me up in the front row, and the pastor came out, and another gentleman I think was wanting to become a chaplain came out, and they said, "Well, they want their picture taken with you after mass," which I enjoyed. But I think it's important that we,
Oh,
whatever our spiritual needs are, that's got to be a priority. Family, friends, that's got to be a priority, and finding balance for that. The fitness we talked about, both physical and mental fitness, has got to be a priority. Recreation and then work. Now, I would tell you many, many times the work stepped in well above all of that, and you got to be prepared for that. But as a leader, you've got to sense, the time you're spending, is it really needed? You got to step back. And what I'm doing at 8 o'clock at night, is it something that's going to make a difference? Or am I stuck in the bureaucracy? And you as a leader, if you don't set that stage and teach that to folks, they'll work their tails off, till and their family's going to suffer. And
yeah.
their health in some cases.
I think that's a lot really hard for a lot of leaders to think they have to solve every problem. And it's okay to like step back and say, I don't necessarily have to be the one to solve this. I don't have to solve this right now. Like someone else on the team can do like I think we like to get really invested because we feel like we could maybe do it better than other people or we and it's I think that's really hard for us to break out of, but I think that's a really great reminder to backtrack to your habits. I love that you would have them schedule in your mass. I'm really big in the Seven Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey, and he has the seventh habit is sharpen the saw, which is invest in yourself spiritually, mentally, physically, and emotionally. So just like you said, I will have my team schedule in every day. I have time to schedule my 40 pages of reading, going to mass every day, my morning workout, and then having a dinner with someone that I really, emotionally want to connect with. And then the rest is like 8 to 9 hours of work, and so like that's kind of like my formula. And it seems that uh you really did a good job with that. Like you really seem to like be kind of that was kind of your model to the best of your ability. Sometimes some days are going to be a little bit more than others, but that's beautiful.
Yeah, I would say though, it took me years to realize that. It
Really.
took me years. And probably it was more at the 3 and 4 star level where it really hit me. Uh, that the people around me, the hours they were putting in, and whether it was really that important of what we were doing that they couldn't go home and go to their son or daughter's, athletic events and things like that, or schools. And but it took a while, and a lot of military folks truly are ingrained in that, that hey, I've got to get this done today. And if
Uh,
you don't set that as the senior leader as guidance, they will work themselves in the hole. Since retiring, though, totally changed. I still do a lot. I never get bored. There's not a day. Somebody was telling me the other day they were bored in retirement, and I looked at them like, how do you
how is
get
that
bored?
possible?
I mean, I find, and my wife and I both find a lot of things that we enjoy doing. And so all the years that she had to step back because I was required to be somewhere, we were required as a couple to go to something. Now I tell her, you if you want to go with me, just let me know. If you don't, that's fine too. That's your decision. I do the same thing when I get asked to do things. And as there's a lot of opportunities to serve on boards. And so I look at them when I get an invite, some paid, some non-paid, and I'll decide, okay, is that within my values? Does that still allow me to do the things I want to do with my 10 grandkids
You
who
got
are
10
across the
grandkids?
country?
My gosh.
And 11th one on the way. And so
Congratulations.
I think what happened is I reordered my life a bit. Not that I'm still pretty busy, but it's things that I'm passionate about. And I still have time for I love fishing and I love hunting, and I block those times. I love messing with farms. And I work with my cousins doing that, being on a tractor, things like that I probably never had hardly any time to do when I was in uniform. So you got to reprioritize and move out.
Well, I was having this conversation with a buddy earlier this week, and I really respect people like you because I feel like there's a lot of people who like get to that retirement phase and then they're just like they check out and their mission in life is done and they want to vacation all the time. They just want to, they're just and I can't wrap my head around it. Like we are all on this planet for a reason, for a purpose, and to have joy and fun, like that's wonderful. I'm not discounting that. But I love that you said I still want to give. I still want to help these charities. I want to help these boards. I want to you do a lot of coaching with, other leaders. And I just am like I respect the people who die on empty. Like that just keep going and they were, they didn't just check out and say, "I'm done." Like I'm gonna go and vacation, move to Mexico for the next 3 years.
Yeah.
So I find that beautiful. General Grass, we have a few minutes left. I want to shift into reflection and legacy. I'm really excited to hear, things that you've learned from, all of your time in the military. I'm gonna try to go through these as quick as possible. What advice would you give to a 25-year-old who wants to serve their country, um, but doesn't know yet how? Like, what advice would you give them?
So this is a good one. I think it's a very important one. I'm working on grandsons. I have one grandson who is with the 3rd Infantry Division right now. He's a mechanic. And
Awesome.
there's so much out there for these young men and women. It's overwhelming at times, the opportunities, and they don't grasp it. I probably didn't grasp the opportunities when I joined at 18 either. And I looked at my grandson one day when he said, "Hey, I want to join. I want to join now." Because he was just out of high school. He didn't know what he wanted to do. Great kid, never been in any trouble, average grades. And he joined. And when he completed basic training, we went to his graduation, Fort Jackson. And my daughter-in-law looked at me and she says, "Are you sure that's the same kid we sent here?" It changed his life. He's a sergeant now.
It's amazing to see the military transformation.
Yeah. And whether you serve 3 years, 4 years, and then you move on to whatever career field you want, or you serve, 47, almost 47 years like I did, which I never planned on, the opportunities are incredible. And so I think the big thing is it's hard at that level, at 18 years old, 20 years old, to make that decision. But if you're even thinking about it, just do it. Because by the time you get your 4 years done, it's gone. I mean, the time you're thinking about, you've already completed that. And now you've already got, you've got a 401 when you leave the military, even at 4 years, the start of one. There's things in life. You got the college benefits, same way with the National Guard. Uh, if you serve 6 years and you can be going to college at the same time. And there's so many opportunities. I've had young men and women tell me, I went to college right out of finishing basic training and advanced training after high school. And they went to college and they said, I've never had a college loan between the benefits we get, from serving in the Guard, the state tuition programs, and in some cases, if they deployed, say, for a year, 6 months to a year, they have the GI Bill as well. So there's just so many things that opens up. And then the camaraderie. I think about this, and I went to basic training in 1970. And I still remember Staff Sergeant Arizumi, my drill sergeant. What in the world career could you have? Remember a guy from that long ago, and you could still see his face. As much as sometimes I didn't like that, as a drill sergeant, but he changed who I was. He changed me and he gave me discipline. He gave me a lot of things I needed at the time. I probably didn't want to listen to my parents, and they gave it to me too, and it came out later. But those kind of relationships you build, throughout, as you saw. I mean, some of the folks we're still dealing with on the volunteer side are people I worked with over the years. So I ask them, hey, do you have a career or somewhere where you're going for the future where you're fulfilling that?
That's
And if not, go now.
I love that. If you have there's so many military people, there's so many guardsmen. If there were a one sentence that you could put on a billboard for all guardsmen to see, what would that one sentence be?
Uh, so we have this, you've seen it, always ready, always there, right? I don't know if you've seen that. That's kind of the logo that the National Guard uses. And I think if I had to put something on there, always ready, always there, what it would be underneath that, there's no better time than now to contribute to your community and nation. Join the National Guard.
Beautiful. I think so many people need to hear that. There's no better time than now to step up and join the community and to help the community. That's wonderful. You need to go. I'm surprised the car doesn't bring you back and to help with their marketing and PR. That's awesome. As far as if you were to go back and give your 20-year-old self a piece of advice, what would that what would it be?
So years ago, I think I was a two-star, got this little dog tag, little gold-plated dog tag. I got it from a command or sergeant major that worked for me. And on it is the Army values. And you learn it, when you go to basic training and the Army values. And I'll just go over them real quick: loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, and personal courage. And if I went back, I would say uh, you learn it, you memorize it, but you don't really think about it when you're young.
You don't internalize it.
Right, right. And everything in life I found kind of hinges around those. And even today, I think, and I've actually given some presentations about this with young folks about respect and how much that word brings. And they look at me and say, "Well, what do you mean?" I say, "Well, respect can be used in so many different areas. Respect for yourself, taking care of yourself. That's respecting yourself. Respect for your enemy. We teach in the military. Some people say, why do you do that? Well, you have to understand who they are if you're going to fight and win and defeat them. Respect for the vehicles you drive, in the military or even your own. Make
Yeah.
sure it's being maintained. It goes on and on and on that respect, for your elders. Why is that important? Because they brought you here, and they're rounding you out. But there's so many things I see in life today that I think that one word, and not counting all seven of them all together, is so critical that we have to have some reflection on it. And I think I would have grasped if I would have grasped that earlier in life, I would have even been definitely would have been a better person.
I think so many of us hear a lot of phrases or terms and words and uh like we hear the word respect and we just don't really think about what does that really mean. And I think like if we just paused and said, what does that character counts mean to it? Like what does it actually mean? And if we just started internalizing that, how much more virtuous and fruitful and successful and happy and joyful and productive we would all be.
Yeah.
Uh, that's
And
wonderful.
I tell in fact, I spoke at a high school a couple of years ago for Veterans Day and about 1,000 students. And I told them, respect doesn't mean you agree with them. You can disagree with someone's position, but if you respect their position, you might better understand it. You still may not agree, but you're showing that person respect like you want to be respected on your opinion, your thoughts.
It's beautiful. Thank you so much for that, General Grass. I want to ask a question that we had from a fan here. Let me read it. It says, when you were coming up through the ranks or leading others, how did you spot someone with real leadership potential? And once you did, what were the most effective ways you found to help them grow into strong leaders?
Wow. Yeah, that's a great question.
I know, isn't that great? That came into me this today.
Yeah, and if I reflect back at all the folks that I've had a chance to work with and work under, uh, I was taught a lot of things by a lot of great people. Even today, in fact, yesterday I was talking to my company commander from the 1980s. We stay in contact. We served together. Uh, and I think they all instilled in me an understanding of what it takes in the military to different ranks. And you begin from the time whether you're an enlisted sergeant or you're moving up through as a lieutenant, you begin to grasp that feeling of personality. Will this person, because there's some personalities that just don't fit with the military. They may do, definitely do fabulous in the civilian world, but the military is unique, just like a police officer or a fireman. They're unique.
Sure.
And so you have to figure out, okay, especially when you move up through the ranks, you know what it takes to be successful. And then you mentor those folks that you think are going to have the skills to move forward. There'll be some people in life that all they can think about is themselves, and they're trying to push their agenda. And you know right away that's not how we have our military set up to lead. If they're self-centered, we don't need them moving up through the ranks. We want people that are humble, but they're talented and they're willing to learn, physically fit. And so you have to take all that into consideration. And then, and I did this with a lot of the folks that I worked with over the years, and I use this on my staff the last 4 years, is who are you training for your position now? No matter what position you're in the organization, if you're one of the leaders of the organization, you should be, and I use the term the next two. As it doesn't have to be the next two, but just keep in mind you are the person that are going to train those coming behind you, and you owe it to them to do that. And I think that was very important, and it's something I learned from others. Uh, the other thing, though, getting back to, it's very important at the 4-star level to sense those who really do not need to continue to serve. And I've been in 4-star conversations within the Army where we had this discussion. And especially when you're moving up through an organization, where there are 2, 3, 4 stars that you're trying to groom, they have the skill, but they may have toxic leadership that you know about and you can't ignore it because they're not going to be successful. And they're going to plow through people, and you can't do that. And in fact, the Army's new selection for battalion command and brigade command looks at that. They bring in psychologists and others. They may have been totally competent in combat, but they just ran through people. And that's just not who we want as our leaders, our top leaders. So sensing that, growing and learning, and then providing mentorship for those, not singling out or being parochial to anyone. You've got to open the aperture, to all the people in your organization and say, okay, if I look at the folks, and you do evaluations and you do counselings, and you look at them, and you got to have the guts to say, the personal courage to say, look, you've kind of peaked out. It's time to go home. And it's hard to tell somebody that. But
Yeah.
then you explain, hey, I think you got a lot of potential in another area. But this isn't it. I had to do that very few times, though, really. It was more of how many positions do we have to fill? And I used to tell some of these young men and women, I still do when I do some mentoring, I said, boy, I'm glad I'm not competing with you all. You are that good.
Well, I think this will be like my last question for you that and it came to me as you were explaining that. I mean, I think the big I don't know, the big observation that I feel like I'm having here is there was probably around, I don't know how many, let's just say 450,000 again, National Guard troops when you entered the National Guard. And only one of them, like you beat, I don't want to say you beat out because I don't want to disqualify anyone else, but you did something that got you to the number one highest ranked position out of all those people. What would you say is the single biggest reason for you to have gotten that?
I, if I reflect back, a couple of mentors along the way, especially as a colonel, is it goes back to, doing only the things you can do. The reverse of that is doing everything within your power before you pass it to your boss. And I had leaders and mentors really at the lieutenant colonel and colonel level that taught me this. And I've observed it. I've observed it from the time I was probably a major, of there are some men and women that they can't grasp a task, and you're trying to empower them to come up with a solution, finish the task, whatever, and they want to come back to your office every 20 minutes to get your guidance. And I learned early on, hey, I got a product here, the boss has asked me to make this the priority, and I did. And then I step back and relook at, or have one of my office mates to take a look at it and say, within my power that the boss has given us, have I done everything to answer his question? Or am I trying to pass it up to him to make him or her an action officer?
Would it also be the same of getting the job done? Maybe it's not answering the question, but getting the job done. Did I do everything to the best of my
Right.
ability to
Yeah.
get the
Be
job
the
done?
same. Yep. Be the same thing. And so that was a key thing. I always tried to look at, am I doing everything which I've been empowered to do? And then if if I'm not, then I need to before I pass it to the boss for a decision or, to move it along. That was one thing. The other thing I think that helped me along the way, I'm a pretty humble person and I've watched a lot of great leaders and being approachable, being able to sit and talk to whether it's a private E1, turning a wrench on a truck to going up and, speaking to the Joint Chiefs. Um, Having that humility, and that's been a part of my personality, even to a fault, my wife would tell you sometimes. She goes, I'm the glass is half full. She goes, well, once in a while it's not. You gotta, and so, but you gotta take that. And I think humble leaders to me, and I've worked with so many that doesn't mean you're weak. It just means you're open to having a dialogue, having a discussion, approachable. Uh,
I think humble humility is one of those words though that so many of us hear and we don't actually internalize it like the word respect. What does being humble mean to you?
uh, so I'll give you an example. You pin on a star, and we teach this to our new one stars. It changes. It changes how people you look at you. All of a sudden, you're a general officer. You must be something special. And as my mentor said, hey, you didn't get any better looking when you pinned on that star. You're still the same person. And I had another mentor, just a wonderful man who commanded the guard division. And he told me when I pinned on the day I pinned on the star, he said, don't change who you are. That's what got you here. And I remember that. And for the humility side, I wanted to make sure that I followed through with what advice he gave me and being approachable, at the same time being stern when I have to be, only when I have to be. And then also to take that and share it with the people underneath me, that were growing, the people were growing. And listen, some of the most difficult things I did as the chief were fiscal challenges, whether it was the sequestration budget, cutting structure out of the guard, things like that. Some of the most difficult because they're all charged. Everybody wants to keep what you have, but then you get a budget and you have to make cuts. And I think in many cases that humility allowed me to have a conversation with anybody out there, whether it was, the adjutant general or, his folks, all the way to the Hill, and try to respect their position, but then build my argument to try to get what we needed.
I love the word humility, and that is wonderful. One of our former interviews that I did was with Jeremy Foley. He was the athletic. He's known to be the greatest athletic director in NCAA history. He rose the ranks to become for the University of Florida for the Gators, and he stated something to me in the interview. At some point in the interview, he stated, "I never tried to rise the ranks. Like I just was the best at where I was at any position. I think it mimics exactly what you're saying. Doing the job, doing the question, whatever you are at that moment, do it to the best of your ability, and people will naturally want to move you along. So what I'm hearing you is say is be the best at where you're at and have the humility. Never, you're not General Grass, you're Frank Grass, and keep that through that process, and you will. It sky's the limit. Is
Yeah, yeah, and the lifelong learning part of that, you got to constantly stay up. One of the things that I teach now to knowledge managers, I do this for the military, and volunteered for the last few years of doing this, is looking at generations. And I start out talking about my generation, baby boomers, and then you move to the X, Ys, and Zs, and now the alphas. And I said, you got to understand those generations uh, because how I think is completely different than, the kids now that can look at five screens. I'm looking at one, and that ties me up. But to look at five screens and grasp that. But at the same time, you got to understand where are they on the social platform? Do they have humility? Do they have social skills?
Yeah.
How are we training them to get after that problem? And there's a great thing. It was put together by Fortune 500 folks, 6, 7 years ago, and it's on a site called getsmarter.com. And CEOs laid out uh, the pros and cons of each generation. And I use that when I talk to the students because and I'm sitting there getting heads like this, yes, yes. And then if you get in the situation where an older generation all of a sudden is working for a younger generation, that can create havoc too.
Mm.
But in the end, understanding where they come from, uh, what are the skills that maybe they don't have? Baby boomer, I tell them, hey, I went to high school. Guess what? The most electronics I had was an electric typewriter. And they look at me like, what?
That's wild.
So watching one of my granddaughters, 6 years old, takes my phone, and skims through and watches all the family pictures.
Yeah.
It's a change in our reality that we have to deal with. And again, how do we get those skills to these young men and women? They're very talented, the
That's
generations after.
Yeah, communication is just so massive in getting that to those guys. Yeah, I love that. I'm the worst person in the world. I know I'm over on time. I'm the worst person in the world to be like, "What? That was my last question. Last question." And then you just are so fascinating that I just keep going. I promise this is my very last one. I know that you didn't come on here to promote anything, but I know that you have a real heart for the National Guard's Youth Challenge program. Can you just briefly just give a I want to give a nice little plug to them real quick. What is the reason you got so passionately involved in the Youth Challenge Academies?
So, as the chief, even before that, in different jobs I've had at the National Guard Bureau, we got a chance to go out and watch this program grow from 30 something years ago. And then, as the chief, my wife and I got a chance to visit some of the programs around the map. And I was always impressed how you take a young man and woman who's just about dropped out of society and you bring them in a 5.5 month program and you basically change their life. And then you do the mentorship beyond that. So I was fascinated by it, uh, because of the dropout rates. And I went to a graduation one time in the District of Columbia. And this one really, really got my attention. And on the stage was the adjutant general and the mayor of DC and myself. And the graduates would come up the stage and they would walk across the, shape. Actually, the commander of the DC National Guard would hand them their diploma. The mayor would shake their hands and talk to them a little bit, and I would shake their hands. And I realized that some of these young men and women had never had an opportunity in their lives to be recognized, much less on a stage. And you could see it in their eyes. They didn't know how to handle recognition. And I'm like, wow. And then they go on to just do some amazing things in life. And some of them I still follow that are just incredible what they've done in life. But I realize that this program can give it, nobody else can do that. They can give them that kind of direction, from our NCOs, giving them the life skills they need, the education side of it from the school districts coming in and getting them either a GED or, high school diploma. And one last one, and I really won't tell you where it happened, but Pat and I, my wife, were on our last visit to a program, and the class was I guess, about I don't know, the last week before they graduate. And we met with 4 cadets sitting across from the table. We chatted with them. Every one of them was having a very positive attitude. They talked about where they came from, which would put you in tears. And one of them went to the director of the program there and he says, would General Grass and his wife come back for a few minutes? I'd like to talk to him. I said, sure. They said, this guy is going to be our honor graduate. I said, okay, anybody. So we sit down and kind of close the doors. And this young man had come out of a gang where he was just about to meet his death. And he had gone through the program, 16 years old, sitting there talking about how it changed his life in tears. And he says, I can't go back to where I came from, but they're going to make sure that I get, to the right place where I'm not threatened and I can get my life started. And he says, I got to get some of my family members in the program. And boy, you talk about, a young 16-year-old
Wow.
who had been a gang member staring you in the eye, who, I'm sure he had some very tough situations and saying it gave him his life back and in tears. So I'm such a fan, and I sure hope that we can keep growing the program and keep it,
Well,
uh,
thank you so much, General Grass, for all that you do for the Youth Challenge. It's just a remarkable program, and I hope so many more people hop on the bandwagon and get excited for there's 38 across the country, and I hope whatever state someone's in that they just get involved in some capacity, being a mentor. You can be a mentor to them, it's just there's countless stories like what you just said that just the worst and to they go I say they go from the bottom of their peer group to being the top of their peer group. It's just remarkable how a 5.5 month program could do that. General Grass, thank you so much for taking the time to just have this conversation. This is such a complete privilege. This is like I'm just gonna be like smiling ear to ear for the rest of the day. So thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you for all that you've done for our country. Thank you for all your leadership continually to share that. Like you're retired and you're still sharing your wisdom. And I'm just like, thank you. With that, you have a wonderful rest of your week. And I really appreciate you taking the time.
Colt, thank you. And thanks for what you're doing, not just there, but, volunteering, but also the messages you're getting out and capturing. It's phenomenal.
Well, I really appreciate you, General Grass, in that. So thank you so much. And we'll chat soon. All right.
Okay.
All
Thank you.
right. Thanks, General Grass.